welcome to another episode of Dr. James Beckett Sports Card Insights. As you saw from the title, the topic today is going to be card trimming. It's been in the news lately. As I've said and done over the years, I try to look at things with a positive tone. There's a lot of negativity about card trimming, and it's certainly there's some elements there that are completely wrong, and there's also some elements there I think that are not well understood. So I'm going to look at it from again a little bit different angle. It's an audio podcast. I won't be showing any visual evidence, but I'm going to talk through some of the considerations and thoughts I've had about this. I thank my sponsors first: Beckett Media, Beckett Grading, Beckett Authentication, ComC.com, Burbank Sports Cards, Mike Stadium Sports Cards, Upper Deck, Topps, Panini, as well as Heritage Auctions and Huggins & Scott Auctions. This is a topic or an issue that really can affect any and all of the sponsors, as well as stakeholders, customers, dealers, manufacturers in our industry. There have been some very negative aspects of it that really are very disturbing. But just to start out, all cards pretty much are printed in sheets. And so then they're cut from the sheets. They're I don't know that I'd say they're trimmed from the sheets, but they're cut. Generally, the manufacturer has a big stack of sheets, and they make sure their registration marks are all lined up, and they're printed with that registration, and then they're put in this cutter, and they're either cut, let's say, with like a laser, or back in the old days it was more of a guillotine, a blade. And if the blade is sharp, no problem. The blade is dull. Or if the sheets would shimmy, especially in the old days, you could get some miscuts. Nowadays, not so much. Generally, the industry has been responsive to the desire for well-centered, clean-cut cards. And so you generally see that in all the newer cards. So cutting from sheets, again, the card starts as a part of a sheet. If you were to acquire an uncut sheet, there is a professional, or I break it into three. You could cut, if there was a very valuable card in the middle of the sheet, you'd have a choice. Well, do I want to keep it as a sheet, or do I want to try to cut out that card? Well, you could get it professionally cut, which is expensive. Generally, the setup charge for cutting a sheet of cards professionally is prohibitive. When they do it, they do a stack of 500 sheets. So it's, once they set it up, they just chop. But if you're doing one, it's the same setup. And then I call semi-professional, where you get some equipment that's good equipment, but again, not the full professional card manufacturer equipment, but different printers have different ways to cut things. And again, without the registration marks, you cannot be as exact. And then amateur, which would include scissors and other paper cutter type things, which can be amateurish. On the other hand, with certain cards, again, you can't get the precision, and that in effect becomes another part of this problem. So some people make a distinction whether it's a factory cut that was cut originally, or if it's an uncut sheet that's 20 years old that you cut later. I'm not sure that matters if it's not detectable. Again, we wouldn't be having this discussion if the cards were trimmed to exactly 2.5 by 3.5 inches, because that is the intention from the factory. Back in the day, there were some oversized cut cards. I remember some 55 Bowmans I had. When you stacked them up, and they just came right out of the pack. Some of them were a little bit longer, shorter, wider, narrower, but that's not normative anymore. I might also say it's not illegal to cut or trim cards that you personally own. It's your property. You can cut them in half, or you can shave off a border. There's nothing illegal about that. It may not, in many cases, it's not even illegal to sell a trimmed card. Now, if you're knowingly trimming it to try to deceive, that's another story. But if you have a card and it was trimmed by somebody else, or it's trimmed and it's unknowingly sold, I don't think that's not a crime. It's also not illegal to submit a trimmed card for grading. If you're submitting it to get an authentic grade, that it's perhaps been altered, but is still an authentic card and a valuable card perhaps, that's not illegal to submit that card. Now, again, if you're attempting to deceive, that's another story. You're knowingly trying to trick somebody. If it's going to a grading service, the graders are supposed to catch that stuff, and if there's one grader that's perceived as more lenient than another grader, how do you even know that you're going to get that grader to grade your cards? Again, there are supposedly safeguards. I know at Beckett Grading we had safeguards with kind of a attempt to have a double blind system that the grader didn't know who owned the card, and the submitter didn't know what grader it was going to go to. But again, these are systems that are not infallible, but they're principles and principal people involved, I'm sure, with all the grading companies. But that's part of the problem. So it's not illegal to get a card back from a grading service and crack the slab and trim it and resubmit it. I think it'd be unethical, but perhaps that's not illegal. Again, if the illegality might come if you're attempting to defraud. If you got a card back from one of the grading services and you thought, well, I got a low grade on that and I'm going to submit it to a different service, there's nothing wrong about that. Again, once you take your professional cutter out and make the card perfectly centered, you may get in legal trouble there because you're attempting. And again, if it's a pattern in practice, then you may be in real trouble, and that would be perhaps criminal activity that authorities would be interested in. Again, so if it's one card, if it's a mistake, that's one thing. But if you're doing a bunch of cards, you're probably going to get in a lot of trouble. The graders I know from the BGS guys, when they have problematic submitters that do wrong things, they can be banned or ways to identify and flag submitters that have had problems. But on the other hand, there are dealers and card submitters that can change their identity or get a new address or a new name or something. And when you look at the submission forms, you're not having to put your birth certificate or your driver's license on there, from what I've seen. If you on the other hand, you put your wife's name or your brother or your friend, you're implicating them if you really are doing something nefarious. So don't, as I said, don't do it just because you might get caught. Don't do it because it's the wrong thing. It's like I say, plenty of ways to make money. So, again, the conspiracy aspect is what might get the authorities interested. If one person's doing something and they're so excellent at doing this trimming that they're slipping it past graders, even graders that are looking for it, again, I'm not sure how they could do that because the trimming is measurable. Like I said, if it's a card that was slightly oversized to begin with, but that I don't think that's happening very much. And you might even dispute the fact that one grading company thinks it's trimmed and send it to another one, and they may say, well, it measures up close enough within our tolerances. I hope that's not the case. Now, what about auction houses? Should they be concerned about cards that are trimmed, that are in holders and not indicated? Well, I think the auction houses should be more concerned about shill bidding and those kinds of things. But unless an auction house is knowingly participating in auctioning off trimmed cards that are not noted as such, I think they're probably in a situation where they're just trusting the grading service. And I think the grading services are 99.9%. Well, I think they're trustworthy. The question is, are they occasionally negligent, or are they grossly negligent, which is a higher standard and really a bad thing? Or did they just make a mistake? Did they mismeasure, or did they? But if they didn't measure on a card there are a number of cards that it's worth it to trim, and those absolutely should be 100% measured. It's kind of like some of the sets and valuable cards in certain sets that have black borders. You just got to be checking for any artificial coloring. Again, if there's intent to defraud, or if there's a conspiracy, then people are deservedly going to get in trouble, and they'll not only have to make restitution, but they'll also perhaps pay a penalty with their freedom even. I had lunch with a very veteran collector a couple days ago, and he just said he's looking at all, and he has a very advanced collection. He just said, some of these cards are too good to be true. He's talking about, pre-1948 cards, 30s, T cards, E cards, all these difficult things, he said. And I said, well, and so his point was twofold, which I think is good. Is it not just that if it's too good to be true, really give a second glance, but he felt like when the condition premiums for higher grades get so extreme, it's kind of an inducement for this kind of activity. And he said, if a card is a nice looking card in a 3 and it's slightly off centered, why would I want to risk breaking it out of the slab, trying to trim it, which might completely ruin the card, just to get the 5 when it's really the same card, except for a slight difference in the perception of centering. I know I haven't covered this in any manner that is end of story. You may have some questions or comments. Always open to doing sequels to some of these issues that we're looking at. I'm hoping that, again, that the card trimming that is nefarious is on a very, very limited basis. But I hope that people are doing wrong things, they get caught. So, but if you've got a question or comment, Dr. James Beckett, all spelled out, at gmail.com. That's DoctorJamesBeckett at gmail.com. You can subscribe to the podcast. There's a BeckettInsights.podbeam.com website where they are, but they're also at iTunes and Spotify and Stitcher and all those. And if you're a regular podcast listener, you already know the drill. But in fact, if you already know that you can listen at 1 1/4 speed or 1 1/2 speed or even double speed if you dare. So, I'm still enjoying doing this. I don't enjoy reading about negative news about the hobby that we love so much, and I would encourage people to take the high road. And I think we'll hear more about card trimming because there's just a lot of money involved in some of these cards. So I'll report. I'll talk to you tomorrow. I've got another episode coming tomorrow, so I look forward to trying to give you a positive spin on this great hobby. So again, thanks for your attention. Pass it on and pay it forward, and I'll talk to you tomorrow. Bye.